Hello again, welcome back to IndyCar on the 20th of December. One more sleep until midwinter. Tomorrow, the 21st, is officially the shortest day of the year in terms of daylight, and obviously the longest, darkest period in our winter. And it's easy when you get to this stage in the winter to feel pretty depressed because, you know, everything's going to be dark earlier. You're not going to see daylight when you go out to work in the morning. You're not going to see it again when you come home in the evening, and it can seem pretty gloomy. And unfortunately, pretty gloomy is the entire outlook at the moment, mainly due to the Bank of England. In an article written today by Professor Richard Murphy, who is a noted economist, also an enthusiastic proponent of Scottish independence, he writes about the unnecessary nature of austerity and the fact that the Bank of England is using austerity. In other words, he's basically instructed the government to impose austerity on the United Kingdom in an effort to presumably reduce inflation. Now, normally austerity, if you are producing a lot of goods yourself and you have energy security, in other words, you're producing your own energy, and you have food security because you're producing all the food that you need, normally in the internal market of the United Kingdoms, this would have the effect of damping down people's buying power because they have less money to spend. Taxes are higher, public spending is lower, it's harder to get things, nobody's got so much money, and therefore that puts pressure on household budgets to stop spending on big ticket items, such as buying a new house, for example, or improving your home, or building an extension, buying furniture, white goods, cars, etc. All of that suffers during this forced austerity. Now, austerity is not something which is essential to controlling inflation in this environment, because the United Kingdom has largely sold off all of its natural resources. Now, when I say its national resources, I mean obviously Scotland's national resources such as oil and gas and renewable electricity have all been privatised and basically sold by the English government to big multinational corporations who then sell that those utilities, if you like, that energy, that food, whatever else they're producing, into a globalised market in which inflation is running rampant at the moment. Now, making austerity, local austerity in Scotland, in the United Kingdom, is not going to bring down inflation in any meaningful way. Inflation has slowed down just a little bit because of some fluctuations in the global market for fuel and food, in which prices have dropped back, or inflation has dropped back and slowed down slightly in the global market. But since the big experiment that the Tories did in free market, global capitalism, international markets deciding the prices of commodities, we've seen that there is no way for individual nations, certainly not as small as Scotland or England, there is no way for these countries to control their internal inflation using the traditional tools that the Bank of England has at its disposal, and that is making borrowing extremely expensive, for example, and putting pressure on the government to cut public spending to virtually nothing. In fact, in many cases, to the point where no further inflationary increases are even allowed or permissible or even possible, because simply government is not providing enough money to local government to provide those services. And so we see cuts, we see unemployment, we see people being made redundant from the public sector. That affects the private sector because those people can no longer buy the services, the goods and the products being produced by the private sector, and so they close down, shops close, factories shut, more people become unemployed, end up being, if you like, a burden on the state, more benefits need to be paid out, people's spending power collapses, and we are forced into recession. And this is exactly what Professor Richard Murphy is warning us about, that the Bank of England is deliberately driving the United Kingdom economy into a deliberate recession, in the supposed hope that this will reduce inflation to their target of 2.5%. It's not going to do that, because inflation in the UK is not being driven by internal policies nor by internal economic management. The Tories are basically guddling around trying to find some way of looking like they're trying to control inflation, and the Bank of England has come up with this hammer to crack a nut kind of methodology of basically crunching down on everybody's spending ability and reducing public spending to virtually nothing. Now, in the face of all of this, it's quite remarkable that the Scottish Government has published a budget which still manages to increase public spending in key areas that they need to protect, notably the Scottish National Health Service, also the education sector, and the social care sector, where they have tried to maintain at least a cost of living rise and in some cases a slightly higher rise in public spending on particularly the NHS than is necessary to cope with inflation. Now, this sounds initially like very good news, and to some extent it is, but it is only buying Scotland a little time, because this will be the last year in which the Scottish Government has enough funding to make this kind of budget work, because now that we know that the block grant is going to be cut in the next financial year, effectively Scotland joins the rest of the United Kingdom in this downward slide into recession being forced on us by the Bank of England. And that is the problem. Scotland is no longer able to make decisions for itself. Professor Murphy made an interesting observation that in the last 20 years or so, Scotland's economy has always outperformed the rest of the United Kingdom, and that was because of the choices made by the Scottish Government in terms of how it disbursed the money that it had available to its local government and to its vital national infrastructure, like, for example, the NHS, the education sector, the police, the fire service, and so on. All of these vital public services are going to be maintained at least for the next 12 months because of this budget. We're also seeing cost of living rises in all the social safety net benefits which exist, including the child payment rising from £25 to over £28, I think, per year. Or somebody maybe correct me, it may not be quite as high as 28, but it's certainly rising at least the rate of inflation, so that Scotland's most vulnerable and poorest people can keep pace with the rising costs of food and energy. So all of this taken together means that Scotland is now being lumped together with the rest of the United Kingdom, being punished by the Bank of England for inflation which is not of our own making, which we cannot control, and which the Bank of England has no hope of reducing to 2.5% using this particular method. So it is quite remarkable that the Scottish Government has been able to do this, but as I say, this will be the last time they'll be able to do it. And this would see the end of the Scottish economy outperforming the rest of the United Kingdom. From now on, we are going to be heading into recession with the rest of the poor old United Kingdom, which is facing at best, and I'm saying at best next year, perhaps a supposedly Labour administration led by supposedly a Labour politician, Sir Keir Starmer, who has basically said that he's going to continue all of the Tory policies. He's not going to stop any of it. He is not going to make any policy changes which might have appeared to be even slightly socialist, because he's scared of losing the votes of the Tory right in the southeast of England. So the very best we can expect is nothing to change, and everything is going to slide down the hill. We are heading to recession now, and we have a window of opportunity of about 12 months while the Scottish Government is able to just about maintain the status quo in terms of public spending, but has had to increase the top rate of tax a little bit in order to try and plug the hole caused by the cut in the block grant. So all of this in the face of global turmoil on the energy markets, global turmoil on the food markets, caused partly by the war between Russia and Ukraine. The invasion of Ukraine has caused a massive spike in fuel prices. Problems with the Red Sea. Now, for those of you who don't really know much about geography, the Red Sea is a vital piece of water which allows shipping to travel from the east side of Africa, instead of having to go all the way around the Cape Horn, all the way around the tip of Africa and back up. They can usually head up through the Suez Canal and into the Mediterranean to bring vital goods, for example oil, from the Gulf states to Europe and on towards the UK. Now, because of what is happening in Israel, Houthi rebels, stirred up presumably by Hamas and other actors are attacking ships in the Red Sea, making it very difficult for oil tankers and other shipping to get to the Suez Canal. That's going to put prices up as well. So none of that is the fault of Scottish voters or British voters in any way, shape or form, and that is going to push prices of fuel up if it continues. We can't control any of this, and the Bank of England is powerless to do anything about it as well. This is basically them doing something for the sake of being seen to be doing something, but which is actually going to drive the entire economy into the ground and make it difficult for anybody to recover. And I'm talking specifically here to business owners in Scotland. Think about what this policy is going to mean for your business. You've already been hurt by being dragged out of the European Union and no longer able to easily export your products, your services and your goods into and out of the European Union without fantastic amounts of trouble, extra expense and delays. Now you're going to be forced into a recession where people here can't even afford to buy what you make or what you provide, and that's going to cause your businesses to shrink or collapse and affect your profits. So it's not good for business, and any Tory voting business owners in Scotland might want to think about how their business is going to survive in this new environment. So it's all pretty heavy going and pretty bad news, but it does mean now that Scotland has just 12 months to free itself from the Union in some political way. Now that could be in the next general election, but that would mean our politicians actually standing up for Scotland and saying, if we do win a seat share, which seems to be the metric being used in the next general election, that the union with England is instantly suspended and Scotland is going to become independent. It would need to be done quickly. It cannot be dragged out or negotiated, because the British government simply will not negotiate it. They will just refuse. And as many people have said for years, that you don't get given your independence by the aggressor or the occupier. You have to take it back. We're not talking fighting here, we're just talking about politically taking back control of all the levers of power for your parliament, which already exists. Devolution was a trap, and it is a trap which has been shrinking over recent years, and it's now got to the point where Scotland cannot make its own laws without them being interfered with or blocked by the UK. And one final piece of news is that the Scottish Government has just announced that it's abandoning its appeal against the UK's intervention in the Gender Recognition Reform Act, which is now, I think, just going to be dropped because A, it had very little support by the vast majority of Scottish voters in the first place. It was deeply unpopular, and now the United Kingdom has basically said we can't do it, and I think the Scottish Government has realised they do not have the funds to fight the UK in court, especially when they know that they're not going to win, because the Court of Session in Edinburgh has already backed the Supreme Court in another case. So I don't see that there is any way out of the union trap. The devolution trap has been set, it's been shrinking, and the noose is tightening around Scotland constantly. And I think we now have just 1 year, 12 months at most, where our public services can be maintained at the current levels before the inevitable slide into recession begins the following year. So it's incumbent on all of us as voters to get in touch with the political leadership of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, and actually just start getting angry with them and saying, you need to do something about this. We don't want to be dragged down with the United Kingdom ship when it finally goes under in the next few years, because the Bank of England is basically ensuring that austerity stays, even though it's not necessary and it cannot reduce inflation, and certainly not the way that they are saying it will. So that's a rather gloomy prediction, but I've had to make some gloomy predictions because the truth of the matter is that staying in the United Kingdom is a death sentence for Scottish industries, for the Scottish economy, and it is going to lead to unemployment and more misery for Scotland's most vulnerable people, because the Scottish Government will be unable to mitigate the cuts which are definitely going to take effect after this 12-month period is over. So we, I think, have to be grateful to the Scottish Government for managing this budget and managing to keep our heads above the water, but effectively we are treading water politically and economically while the United Kingdom ship begins to go down by the stern. And let's make sure that we are not still aboard that ship when it does that. That's it from IndyCar today. Hopefully I'll have a slightly more upbeat message for you before we all go on holiday for the Christmas period. But I'm really waiting for some big developments politically to take effect, and it's high time our politicians stop navel-gazing or fighting amongst themselves and started to focus on the real problems which Scotland is about to face. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye for now.